challenge facing the writers of these scripts was that they had to work within the limits of the production code. So they had to figure out very subtle ways of conveying all this sexuality and greed and lust and all this illicit stuff.
We ought to get along fine. I'm a gambler myself.
Oh? How high do you like to play?
If I told you, you wouldn't believe me.
You will find in these films tremendous sexual symbolism. Cigarettes are used in many ways that you didn't really understand. Oh, yeah, that's what the cigarette actually represents. You know, trains into tunnels and all those kind of things.
Sexuality in film noir, it permeates the whole movie from start to finish, either through the music, but certainly through the innuendo and the dialogue.
I need a drink. What do you need, Mr. Doyle?
Well, let's say a drink.
Film noir movies are often very sexual, but they're sexual in a much more dark, violent, animalistic way, rather than anything that might be called love.
He's kind of exciting and attractive.
Who's attractive? Who's exciting?
Earl!
The thing that's great about noir is that this collaboration between the writers and the directors and the actors really created a tone for these pictures, and there was no way the production code could fight that.
There's those ways of creating a sexual tension that has actually nothing to do with a kiss, a hug, and embrace, but more between what could be and is not quite going to happen.
For another nickel, we can have a rumble.
No, thanks. Save your money. Hard times are coming.
It's 1945 to 1958. Sexuality has not been bandied about, dissected, discarded, reinvented, demythologized, re-mythologized, and deconstructed the way it has 50 and 60 years later. It still had some panache. It was something that people didn't talk about openly, but did fervently behind closed doors, but in somewhat less volume than today. So it had the odd power of the illicit. And I will only close with this about sex, the great joke of the 1950s. I want to find the guy who invented sex and ask him what he's working on now.
I think the film noir filmmakers that were really filmmakers for B films. And if you look back at the history of Hollywood, in the 40s and 50s, huge numbers of films were being made. And they were made either with large budgets, A category films, or small budgets, and those were the B films. I think young filmmakers then, that's how they learned to make movies. They were shuttled into the low budget films, and they were given pretty much free rein because they were made under the radar completely. But these films were largely made to fill the lower part of a double bill in order to have a long evening's entertainment at the theater. So they were, in a strange way, a creation of the distribution system in America. That a lot of these films were made by immigrants who came from Europe. And I'm thinking of people like Fritz Lang, who, at the height of UFA in Germany, pioneered a lot of the techniques of film noir. Also, Billy Wilder came from this same sort of cooking school of UFA, so to speak, and brought all the ingredients to America and used them freely.
It was a very complex phenomenon, noir, this style. It had antecedents in German expressionistic film between 1919 and 1938. That laid out the formal systems for film noir, lighting schemes, staging, as well as subject matter, because German expressionistic film was dealing with men who were coming apart, human beings who were coming apart.
Film noir is a wonderful genre for cinematographers simply because we can create a light that behaves like its own character.
When I think of noir, I always think of diagonals, things not being level, not being straight, because nothing is quite on the level. Nothing is what it seems.
There's just a very menacing mood. The camera angles are askew. You're never quite sure of where you're at in this world.
Shoot up, shoot down. It's a way of attacking space because harmonic space is your enemy, because harmonic space represents a secure world, and you are in an insecure world.
In your classic noir movie, the camera's used in two different ways. It has to express not just what's happening in a scene, but it has to express the psychological depth or problems of the characters in the scene itself. It's telling the story, but it's also presenting a stylized viewpoint of abstract concepts.
So a lot of the great moments in film noir are not looking straight at somebody, but from a weird position that, as an audience, makes you feel a little uncomfortable, a little nervous, a little tension.
Is that the patrol?
It's the wind and the telephone wires over in the highway.
Relativity is important to me, going from light to dark, dark to light. And film noir is I find it fascinating when I watch it. I've always considered it this kind of stark, graphic lighting. There's a lot of graphics in the lighting. I've always felt it's what you don't see that's kind of disturbing. So you don't quite know what's going on.
Not seeing the face is fascinating, too. Seeing that little bit of shimmer on skin, or the way the hat is against the blinds, you know. It's a more mythic way of dealing with light and dark, good and evil.
So you have to have rain, you have to have smoke, you have to have dark shadows, you have to have maybe moving light, you have to have some kind of a light pattern that the characters walk through. So maybe it's a fence, maybe it's a window pattern, maybe it's a shadow of a tree, maybe it's tree branches. So that's the visual language that we work with when we do film noir.
And I still feel that the black and white noirs are the best. In color film, the lighting has never been able to achieve the degree of precision that you see even in Hollywood B movies.
One more job.
No.
One more job, a big one.
No, I'm afraid.
The originality of film noir is you had these technicians from Germany who loved to split everything into shadows and fracture light. The Letter with Bette Davis is a beautiful example of film with the German kind of lighting in it. Then you had the post-war movement of getting out of the studio and shooting in the streets.
A lot of the technology which freed the film noir was actually pioneered during the war. High-speed lenses, fast film, the mag stock for sound, which liberated the camera so that you could actually take it on the street. Lightweight cameras came into existence, hence the handheld camera.
And so they were out in the street shooting films that were being shot in 10 days and still trying to use that kind of lighting, and it made for a very original and fresh world.
The setting of where they happen is very important, usually urban settings. That world has to become part of the film noir world. The Tenderloin district or the police precinct district or the seedy, strange places that you go to investigate a crime. It becomes this very precise and contained film noir world. You know, you don't see kids in film noir movies. You don't see a lot of normal things.
There is that whole sense of the whirlpool, the kind of a Freudian sense of being sucked down and being lost in the primal mystery.
What's the big idea?
Being trapped is essential to the whole noir ethos. You've done something and now you can't get out of it. Even if it's something that takes place in the great outdoors, invariably the film will be photographed and edited in such a way that the protagonist feels completely trapped.
I wanted her to smile, but she wouldn't. I tried to make her smile.
A lot of the locations and the types of environments that you're shooting film noirs in tend to be those which are closing in on the character as opposed to opening up. You don't find a lot of film noirs in the desert.
These films didn't cost a great deal of money. There wasn't a great deal of time to shoot them. And as a result, you tended to minimize setups. And that's why you have a character in the extreme foreground and a character in the extreme background, both facing the camera. That way you could fit them both in the frame in a stylized and interesting manner and shoot the entire scene in one setup.
I think it might come as a surprise to a lot of people to realize that the producers and directors of these films were being so creative visually to hide the fact that they had no budgets at all and the production values were terrible. So it's like, yeah, let's cast a shadow over there because otherwise it's just an empty hole. There's nothing to look at.
What could we do to get the attention of the executives, to show them that we had the talent? The only thing we could do was work in setups and in camera techniques and camera lighting, because that didn't take any time. Actually, the lighting we developed, which became later known as film noir lighting, took far less time than classical lighting.
So, you know, you work fast like that. You kind of make things up and use techniques like the things that were created by a cameraman like John Alton and stuff were done through necessity.
I think sometimes darkness is more beautiful than light. I think everybody has a certain sense, although they're not conscious of it, of how things change in the dark. And the greatest thing in the world happened at night. The good and the bad happens at night. The murders and the marriages and the love scenes, all at night.
All those elements make the viewers respond to the story on an instinctual level rather than intellectual level. The visual style is a little bit more instinctual.
Well, the environment of film noir is the urban world. In mid-20th century America, it is the depiction of this dark, seductive fantasy world that draws people to these movies above and beyond everything else. It's almost like a fever dream of that world.